The search for Santa Paws is an absolute delight. There are only two things about this that I didn't care for. They're very minor things, but I'll talk about them in due course. In general, though, this is adorable. This is a Disney film from 2010. This is directed by Robert Vince. It's written by Vince and Anna McRoberts. And we have a cast including Kaitlyn Maher, Madison Pettis, and Richard Riehle. And this is one of the most adorable films ever, and very moving and very magical. Paws is Santa's dog, and they're both in New York, and unfortunately, Santa is hit by a car, and somebody steals the crystal around his neck, which means that he loses his memory, and Paws runs away, and he ends up going to this foster home where he meets a young orphan girl called Quinn, and we also have another orphan girl called Willamina, and they are looking after Paws, and there's some Christmas magic there. Meanwhile, Santa ends up, I guess coincidentally, wandering into a toy store, and they think that he's there to be their toy store Santa for the Christmas season. And there are a lot of beautiful moments there. But of course, people at the North Pole are frantically trying to find out where Santa is and where he's gone. And of course, it's a race against the clock to try and bring him back to the North Pole, to locate him and bring him back. And I don't want to go into too much detail or too much more detail about the specifics, but I thought it was a really lovely narrative. Paws is an absolutely adorable puppy. Absolutely gorgeous. The girls are all really likable characters. Willamina's a little rough around the edges, but she's a delightful character nonetheless. Quinn is adorable. Very sweet, such a likable character, and coupling that with the adorable Paws, it's just so precious. The toy store is a very fun location. It works really well as a setting, and Santa Claus definitely fits right in. The only thing I don't like about Santa, and this is not one of the two things I wanted to mention, this is not really a big deal, but I don't like Santa's beard and hair. Santa usually has a very full, fluffy looking beard, but his looked kind of ratty and scraggly, and I didn't care for it, but not enough for me to, not enjoy the film or anything. And that's not one of the two things I wanted to mention. I'll mention those in a moment. But in general, I thought this was adorable, magical, quite unpredictable, and very, very well done. It's a sweet, magical, sometimes very emotional story, and from start to finish, I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I believe there is a sequel, which is on my radar, and I will be watching that as soon as possible. I had a lot of fun with this, a very moving narrative, really great performances, very, very festive. There is Christmas everywhere, and I absolutely love that. Really thoroughly recommend it. I will now mention the two things that I didn't love. They're really tiny things. Well, one more than the other. One is a spoiler, one isn't. So the one that isn't a spoiler is that Santa meets Quinn. Quinn, the girl who's an orphan, goes into the toy store and meets Santa, and he tells somebody else that Quinn lives at the foster home, and the immediate response was, "She's an orphan?" I think that's really irresponsible, because not everybody who's in a foster home is an orphan, and children are going to be watching this, and they might have somebody in their class at school or at a club or something who is in a foster home, and now that child is going to assume that that person who's in a foster home is an orphan, and they might start calling them an orphan depending on how nice of a child they are. And I just think it was really irresponsible to imply that everybody who's in foster care is an orphan. And it's such a small thing, and maybe no child would pick up on it, but all it takes is one child to then run with that and tell somebody they know who's in foster care that they are an orphan, and they know they're an orphan because this Christmas film told them they were. And I thought it was very irresponsible, so I didn't love that, but I know it's just a tiny thing. The other thing I didn't love, and this is a big spoiler, and this is the last thing I have to say about the film, is that Paws turned back into a stuffed toy and ended up, big spoiler, as I said, well, relatively big spoiler, ended up in an incinerator. And honestly, I thought that was a little bit too dark. Obviously, I watched a lot of horror films. I'm not scared of the scene. But for me, as a younger child, I would have found that quite scary. Partly because I'm terrified of fire, always have been, but also the image of this beloved pet, even though he's now a stuffed toy, going into the incinerator and inching closer and closer towards the fire. I really didn't like that. I found that to be a little bit too dark for the film, so I don't think they made the right decision there. Yes, they're trying to make it scary and intense and dramatic, but I don't think it worked very well. That being said, the film has obviously been given a rating, and certainly in the UK it's rated universal, so the people who are in charge of saying whether a film is too scary for a child or not, they seem to think it's fine. But personally, as a child, I would have found that quite traumatizing. But that aside, The Search for Santa Paws is a magical film, a beautiful story with some wonderful characters. And apart from those teeny tiny things, I really thoroughly enjoyed it.